Hello, everyone. I'm Dominique.
And I'm Christina, and we are the Connected in Glass podcast.
Every week, we will feature interviews with glass artists who speak to their creative processes and overcoming challenges.
These conversations are real and raw. We hope that by sharing these stories, you're able to find some connection and know that you're not alone.
We just wanted to take a moment to thank you for listening to our podcast. We're super passionate about this project and work for hours every week to bring you this content. So if you'd like to help support us, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/connectedinglass. Also, please consider joining our Facebook group, Connected in Glass Community, where we continue the conversations from these episodes. We'd love to hear from you.
This episode of Connected in Glass is sponsored by Diddy Clips. Diddy Clips has changed the way we film our glassblowing videos, and we're proud to be working with them. Today, we're interviewing Kat Green. Kat is a glass artist based in Florida who's been working with glass since 2018.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Hello.
Thanks for being here with us.
I'm glad to be here.
All right, so we're so excited to get to know you. At first, maybe we can skip the glass part of your life for a minute. Tell
Sure.
us a little bit about where you live, what you enjoy besides glass, and then get us into the story of how you started working with glass.
So right now I live in Jacksonville, Florida. And I don't mind this, but I really don't do anything other than glass. It's kind of my obsession. So if I'm like I'm either sleeping, eating, watching a TV show, or blowing glass. Like that's all I ever do.
You found your crowd right here.
Yeah, I've got hooked the moment I first took one. I took one like 3-hour class and I just like couldn't stop.
Okay, so tell us about that class. Where was it and what made you do?
So it's actually like related to me being trans. Basically, I spent a long time running away from that fact, and leading up to right before I started blowing glass, I kind of just went on this like fun little spending spree and like blew all my savings on a bunch of glass and like random stuff. And I ended up throwing a party and inviting one of my friends who had been transitioning for a year, and spent the whole week telling her how jealous I was. And so eventually she pulled me aside and was like, "Hey, so like I'm flattered, but also that might mean something." Like that could be a thing. And I was just like, oh shit. And at that moment I realized, one, I needed to transition, and two, I just spent all my savings. And the last thing I wanted to do was like try and work a customer service thing or deal with transphobic bosses or anything like that. I wanted to find something that, would be a little bit more freeing. And at the time, I was a freelance floral designer. I did like weddings and stuff like that. So I just like looked around the room and saw like thousands of dollars worth of glass that I just spent buying over the last few months. I was like, why don't I just do that? There's like, if I could spend that much money doing this, I could probably make that much money doing this. So the same shop which I won't mention because I don't like them so much anymore. The manager was not super nice, but there were some awesome glass blowers there though. So I went right into that shop and they had an attached glass blowing studio, and I was like, I need to learn how to blow glass. And they're like, okay, come back on Thursday with $100 and we'll give you an intro class on like working with clear and solids and like making like a spinning top and a mushroom implosion, like the basic. And so I did that, and then I ended up spending like the entire day there. And I went home and I literally started dreaming about glass. Like I just couldn't stop thinking about it. I was obsessed. And at the time I was doing a lot of ceramics. That was like my main artistic outlet. And I literally just like bailed. I like left all my shit at the ceramic studio and just was like, peace, I'm gonna go blow glass now. And like never went back there. I just left like all my tools and everything. I was just like, fuck this, I'm out. We're gonna go blow glass. So, and then ever since then, I was just kind of obsessed. It's all I ever think about.
Wait, so were you really good at it at first, or did you find that there's like a learning curve involved?
There was definitely a learning curve. If I went back and looked at where I started it. There's definitely a learning curve, but it's a steep one. It's a very so I total, because between 2019 and 2020, I took about a year off because I didn't have a spot. And so total, I really only have a little bit over 2 years of torch time. And in that 2 years, I went from making like little feather pendants that I would like. But in DC, the cannabis industry is a little bit weird where weed's legal, but you can't really sell it. So you sell something else and then give them the weed for free. So I'd make a bunch of little tiny pendants and sell those to vendors. And then the vendors would use that as like their thing. So I went from making like $5 pendants and $2 spoons to making like $500 rigs in 2 years.
Did you learn that all by yourself, or did you scout out other studios and other artists to learn from?
So as much as I have a lot of trauma from that first studio, the other glassblowers there, I wouldn't be where I am now without them. I've only ever gotten like 2 official classes, that one intro class, and then I took a weekend class with Karsten Glass, where we learned about like making his skulls and things like that. So there were 3 main glassblowers there that really totally kind of showed me the ropes and inspired everything that I do now. There's a Christo Breaks Glass. He's super, super crazy talented, and his work's very, very clean. And he showed me a lot. And then there's also PJ Glass Biz, PJ, and he does a lot of wigwags. So a lot of like my first spoon demo, Christo gave me, and things like that. And then the number one person who totally was just like amazing was this guy, Robert. And he's not very well known, but he's been blowing glass for like 30 years, like a really long time. And I think it's Bull Run Valley Glass on Instagram. Super, super cool guy. Awesome, awesome person. And literally every single day he did production, but he had like all the toys and like knew all the techniques and stuff. He showed me how to make vac stacks, space tech. Just like anytime he was doing anything, he'd be like, hey, come over, look at this, and like walk me through what he was doing every single day. And without that, I wouldn't have been able to like constantly learn. And he was always there to like answer questions or things like that. So those 3 people totally, like, I would not be anywhere near where I am now without being able to look over their shoulders.
What a gift to have somebody share that openly with you. That's beautiful.
Yeah, it wasn't like that at first. It was definitely a little awkward and standoffish. Robert was always cool, but everybody, like the other 2, were a little bit standoffish at first, but they warmed up, and eventually they were super, super, super cool. And yeah, I have so much respect for those 3. They're fantastic people and crazy talented.
Okay, so take us to where you are now.
So now I have my own studio. I work pretty much every single day in my shop. I usually put in around 8 hours, sometimes more. It's been crazy during the summer because down here in Florida, it's like crazy freaking hot. So for a while, I had to work between midnight and like 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. because that's the only time it would drop below like 85 degrees. So.
And what's your studio setup?
I was sharing a space with Scoby Glass. He has like, he lives like a few blocks away from me. He's also crazy talented, super, super cool guy. We don't really hang out anymore, but I still have hella respect for him. He's a really awesome person. And like all of his apprentices are queer, and like he's super cool. He's a really, really cool person. And when it was time for me to leave that space, it happened a little bit suddenly. And the place that I'm renting, I really lucked out finding this place. Honestly, it was a great deal, and it has a bunch of stuff. So behind what's supposed to be a laundry room it's like this little shed, but that meant that like all the electrical was already rated for my kiln. It had holes already cut for ventilation for the dryer. So literally it's all done with screws. I didn't cut a single hole, rewire a single thing. It's all, so I could strip it down and put it back up somewhere else pretty easily. So yeah, it's supposed to be a laundry room, but that meant like running water, already had like holes for ventilation, already rated to run the kiln. It was perfect, honestly.
You did all that work yourself, just kind of
Yeah.
through research, or did you have to like ask for help in any way?
At this point, I had spent enough time in enough different shops to be able to have a pretty decent idea of how to do it. Yeah, for the I didn't really have to. I had one friend who is not a glassblower. She's like an accountant, but she happened to be in town and she helped me move my stuff because I don't have a car. But I used my savings, and also that stimulus check came in handy. And I bought everything and just put it all together. So yeah, I didn't really have any help building it or anything like that.
Can you walk us a little bit through your creative process or maybe how you plan your days? I know you said you're like all glass all the time. Do you ever just do you kind of plan your day around it, or do you just go in and you know what you want to make and you just go with it?
I really just kind of go with the flow and it just kind of happens. And there's sometimes where I'll lose my motivation and spend a couple days like not working. And then I always am like, okay, you need to get your ass out there and get back to it. And then, whenever I like get back into it, the moment I turn the torch on, I'm like, yes, this is what I needed to be doing. And yeah, I do have I'm obsessed right now, and for the longest time I've been obsessed with line work techniques. I really just love wig wags and working with backstack. So that's like 90% of what I do. I know how to do other things like sculptures and things like that. I've made like little dragon rigs and things like that before, but for whatever reason line work just really does it for me. And so I have a few basic, like I have a rough idea of how I do most things. And it's usually like, so it's funny, I don't smoke anymore, but I'm still obsessed with making pipes because of it's kind of like a fun brain teaser for me. It's so unique to have something that is combining both scientific, like tons of different scientific techniques with a bunch of artistic techniques, and finding a way to make it beautiful, but also marriage that with optimum functionality is so interesting to me. So my artistic style kind of has a similar format. I use a lot of wig wags and have a few standard ways that I kind of assemble those wig wags. And then I have a lot of little tiny details that I use to make it function better. So like all of my dry pieces have built-in screens. I don't do single hole anything. So slides have built-in screens. I don't really make too many I hate spoons. I feel like it's too easy to get Scooby snacks, like little bits of ash in your mouth. I hate them. So I mostly make hammers or Sherlocks if I'm going to be doing a dry pipe, and they all have built-in screens. I've also made a few. I don't make too many old school style bubblers. Most of them are the newer doer style with the joint, but I also put a built-in screen in those. So yeah, I don't know. I have like all kinds of fun little details that I use for making it function better.
And like say you're working out a new process, are you able to visualize it in your head, or do you take it right to the glass, or do you ever draw or write out steps or thoughts or processes?
I don't draw or write anything ever, unless I will draw it out if I'm trying to explain something to someone. But for the most part, I can picture everything in my head. I can assemble like visually in my mind the entire piece before I've even touched the glass.
That's
I
a cool
usually
skill
have
to
a
have.
rough idea of like what it's going to look like in my head before I get anywhere near finishing it. What the things I don't really know what are going to look like are like little attachments or accent type things, but the general gist of what's going to happen, I usually already have figured out by the time I've dove into the piece.
And how do you price that? Like, it seems like you have a really firm formula with how you make your work, but do you have one for like how you price it or?
So that has been the most difficult thing my entire career, which honestly isn't even that long, but still, that's always one of the hardest things is pricing everything. And I also like this is like having everything on my head, like making sure that everything runs smoothly, like fuel, just every little detail is a little bit new to me. So managing the pricing has been difficult. I do have an accountant that I work with sometimes, and we like talk through my budget and what I'm gonna plan for the business. So I have a little bit of help on that front, like professionally. And then It's really tough because it's crazy because like no matter how much I raise my prices, there's always like another glassware who's like, that should be way more. But and I'm like, I wish I could charge more, but I barely get people to buy it, because when I first started, I've been making fully worked pieces for a long time, although the ones now are astronomically better than the ones, a couple years ago. But for the longest time, I did them consistently 350. They were always 350, which was a huge undercut of what it should have been for a fully worked rig. But I had a really great deal on Backstack because I bought it all from Robert over on Valley Glass, and he gave me a crazy deal. I can't get that stuff anymore because we're not really in touch. I should reach out to him. But so yeah, that's super tough. As of right now, one thing that's helped me is I've started working with a distributor. So anything that doesn't sell retail after a while on my page just goes right to the distributor. And for that, I've kind of developed a standard price sheet. And I also, in the past, I would sometimes be willing to like water down my style to fit kind of any price range. And I stopped doing that. I don't do that anymore. Like I would do like one little wigwag section and the rest clear or something like that. And I hated it. It was miserable because I didn't feel like I felt stifled, and it doesn't live up to what I'm actually capable of. So I kind of was like, okay, no longer will I water down my style. And so now I'll either give someone like a payment plan option, or just tell them to like save their money and invest in a piece that actually represents my artistic ability. Because then it's fun for me to make and it's fun for them to use and everybody wins. Whereas it just always feels like a disgusting compromise whenever I have to like water it down and make it super simple and cheap and affordable. I don't like doing that anymore. So yeah.
Can you tell us how you split up your income, like the different ways that you generate it, whether it's through personal sales or that distributor, or if it constantly changes?
I really just like make things available on my page. Oftentimes I'm willing to negotiate prices, or I'll take like half and then they can pay off the rest whenever they want and things like that. But I I'm not super organized on the money side of things. It just I kind of just like go with the flow, and it somehow keeps working. I don't Eventually I intend to be more organized with it. That's definitely on my list of things to get on top of. But for now, I really just kind of make it happen. I don't really know. I don't really know how to describe. It's not. There's no like strategy or plan. It just works for some reason.
Hey, you're the first person that's told us that they actually use like an accountant to help them with things.
Yeah.
So props on
Yeah.
that. We've interviewed probably 30 plus people,
Season
and not
5.
one person has told us about just consulting an accountant about like prices and overhead and your budget and stuff. So
Yeah.
I know that
Super
maybe
cool.
maybe you don't feel like you have it all together, but just that little piece is like a good point.
Yeah, I mean, so I do get a little bit of help from a few. Like I have good insurance and things like that. So a lot of my medical stuff is like my mental health is super important to me. So that's why I'm familiar with the Zoom thing, because I'm doing either therapy or doctor's appointments, or I meet with this accountant who's just a little bit more of just like a general advisor type person on how to like set up those things. Because I I'm not stupid, but I suck at math. Like astronomically terrible at math, and so I knew that once I when I started back up again in January of this year, I knew that I really kind of had to make this work, or I was kind of screwed, and I'd have to go get like a normie job and deal with transphobic people, and I really didn't want to have to do that. So I just did my best to set myself up for success. And I was like, one thing I'm definitely going to need is someone who's going to help me organize getting savings accounts and paying sales tax and, saving, doing taxes at the end. Like because I haven't really done that before. I haven't, I've been a hobbyist for a very long time. And this is the first time I'm like fully supporting and paying all of my bills and everything I need to do with glass. So now I have to start paying taxes and like doing sales tax and all this stuff. And I knew that I was just gonna like blow that off and eventually get audited and be totally screwed. So I was like, I need to find someone who can walk me through how to set myself up for all this stuff. One super cool thing though is learning about what's deductible on your taxes, because my studio counts as a home office, which means my rent, a portion of my rent, can be written off on my taxes. I know, like a few other things.
Yeah.
I kind of wanted to steer a little bit here. What has been your experience with being trans in the glass world?
It's very mixed. I have met some very, 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 very awesome people, and I've met some really, really not so awesome people. It's very mixed. It's definitely not easy to find a space that is affirming, let alone safe. Yeah, that can be difficult. Like here in Jacksonville, I'm not, so just to like prevent putting anybody on blast, I'm going to not name specific places, but there are two slightly larger studios near here that I know of, and one of them is run by like actual Nazis, like SS tattoo actual Nazis, and then the other one is a bunch of like they they like sell a lot of drugs, and they literally have written in big letters on their hood above the like all the bench spots, it says work hard and don't fuck trannies. So like that's the vibe in a lot of places. One thing that has worked well for me, like for example, when I had that group with that class with Karsten Glass, people weren't really like paying attention to me. They kind of one thing I've noticed is like when people don't want to really like clue everybody in to the fact that they are uncomfortable with you being trans, and so they're not going to outright say anything offensive, but they will completely ignore the fact that you exist. And so what I do is during that class, for example, I built 2 fully worked rigs, a fully worked recycler, and then 3 of Karsten's skulls, and started one of his full skeletons before the class was over. And everybody else was like, and so that's kind of worked well for me. If you know, if I kind of need to take up a little bit of space and be like, I know what the fuck I'm doing, don't give me shit. Kind of that's usually my strategy. But on the flip side, and like also that first shop that I got started in, as cool as the other glassblowers were, the person who managed that shop, which I will not name what shop this is, but it's one in Maryland, she was a raging turf. She did not, she knew me before my transition, so she knew my dead name, and she would like very loudly scream my dead name at me in front of customers and like intentionally try to embarrass me in front of people. It was really bad. There was also someone who was there who was like kind of her favorite, but he was on a lot of drugs all the time, and very like he would try to turn on the switch for the hood fan, and he couldn't judge the distance between himself and the fan because of how like out of it he was. Or he'd like pull his Mirage off his table and like set his foot on fire. We'd all have to run over there and put him out. So he was like really fucked up. And she forced me to share a kiln with him. And he's making like these little $2 pipes, and I'm making a $500 rig. And he just like chuck a pipe in there and knock something off my piece, or he wouldn't close the kiln door all the way, and then the kiln drops to like 500 degrees, my piece cracks. It was really bad, and eventually I just couldn't make any money anymore at that space. And when I went to try and find another place to work, I found out that she'd kind of been bad mouthing me to every single other shop in the state, or like in that area, like the DC. There's no shops in DC, but in like Virginia and Maryland, and literally no one would let me into their shop. So that sucked. That really sucked. But then on the flip side, I've met some crazy awesome people, and one of them is Scoby Glass. He's super, super cool, awesome guy. He's got a very unique style that he does with fume. He does like these melting clocks. Highly recommend his work. He's very talented, and he's a crazy cool guy. From the moment, like we'd never met before, and I was coming out of a lot of really intense, serious stuff, and he immediately was super, super cool and helpful. And I would not have been able to set myself up here in Florida without all the help he gave me. He let me work in his shop when I was getting started back up again. And he was very cool with me being trans. He never misgendered me, never, nothing like that. It was, and we had great conversations. We didn't always agree on everything, but he was very respectful. So, like I said, super mixed. There's some crazy, crazy cool people, and then there's some really, really, really not cool people. It's kind of hit or miss.
Thanks for sharing so much. It blows my mind that you have to like prove yourself to make it feel like you belong in the space. Like when you're
Oh, I mean,
saying you take that class, you have to like overachieve to prove that you belong and
I have
not
to
just
overachieve for them to acknowledge the fact that I'm there.
yeah. Yeah.
Now, about a year ago in 2020, I think it was July 6th, 2020, I hadn't been able to find a place to work. I got dumped and we're in quarantine, and I was like not okay mentally. I checked myself in. And then I did another month of a partial hospitalization, which is like kind of like a Zoom daily thing. And then if you ever know anybody who like needs a place to go and like get their shit in order, I know a spot. I know a really, really good spot. It's called The Refuge, and it's in Ocala, like 2 hours away from here. And they're amazing. And they totally, completely changed my life. I mean, I've had a lot of trauma, like even like way like long before I started blowing glass. Like I used to do lots of drugs and be in the EDM scene and like do lots of festivals and things like that. And like I spent almost like a whole year on acid one time. That was years ago, back when I was like 18 to 22-ish. But yeah, so I went there and they totally changed everything. That's how I ended up in Florida. As I was doing, so I basically when Scoby met me in person and I started working with him, I'd been institutionalized for like 6 months. And so yeah, so I really regret the situation that led me through all of that. But going through all of that treatment, because I just kept finding place after place. I was just like, I need fucking help. And so I just kept checking myself into places. And by the time I got to the refuge, I was okay. Like I was okay, but I hadn't really I just recovered from the one thing that had just happened and not really addressed everything else that's gone on in my life. Like I've had someone try to kill me one time. I've had a boss like drug me and try to like do like all kinds of crazy shit. So I started to like really unpack that at the refuge. So I spent 3 months and it totally changed my life. And ever since I came out of there, I set myself up with, this like coach to help me manage my business, a therapist, a psychiatrist, an endocrinologist. Like I got on top of all that and got all of my stuff sorted. And now I've gone from like, when I got out of the refuge, I was on like 10 different medications. Now I'm on one. So yeah. So I'm really good now because I just spent a really long time heavily dedicated to getting good. Where it was, I literally spent 6 months completely, like the only thing I ever did was therapy all day, every single day. And I'm so grateful for it. I'm a huge believer in therapy and taking care of your mental health and things like that. And I've been struggling with a lot of things before, but I've never like really put that much into it. And it totally changed everything. And so I've like, me and my ex that we broke up, we're like best friends now. I have a great relationship with all my family members again. So yeah, things have like gotten astronomically better. And so now I don't know, my ability to handle things and process stuff and just like stay on top of everything is leagues higher than it was before. And so now I really feel like I could take on pretty much anything. So the two main things that are getting me through just living in this world is one, I've done a shitload of therapy. And two, I don't answer to anybody. I do whatever I want, whenever I want. And I have all my own workspace and equipment and everything. So those are the two things. I also like used to have a lot more dysphoria, and I haven't really done the surgeries that I want to do, but I'm still way more comfortable with myself. Like it used to really cut deep when other people, because I'm kind of butch. I look usually pretty like I'm always blowing glass. I'm usually wearing like jeans, a t-shirt, and look kind of grungy. And it's not always extremely apparent that I'm a woman, and or at least to like cis people who aren't familiar. So I do get misgendered a lot, but it really doesn't bother me anymore. It really doesn't. It doesn't bother me. People that I like give a shit about, I'll expect them to put the effort in to, do things correctly. But people that I'm not like friends with or close to, I don't care. Like I know exactly who I am. It's not my fault they're mistaken.
If only I could harness just a little of your like self power and like your confidence. Like, yeah, it's so nice to hear. Like, hear that you feel so strong.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about like, because you're really active on Instagram, right? And you put yourself out there a lot. Do you have like a format that you follow, or you just kind of like just try to be yourself all the time?
I really try to like, well, first of all, since I started blowing glass to be able to afford to transition, and two, I started blowing glass to be able to transition and avoid dealing with people that I didn't want to have to deal with. And so as a result, it's important to me to be extremely authentic about who I am, what I believe in, and what's important to me on my page, so that if you're supporting my work, you know who you're supporting. And if that's not someone that you want to support, they usually don't interact with me. And so I share a lot about, also when all the protests were going on and I was still active on Instagram, but I didn't have any glass to post because it wasn't working. So for a very long time, I turned my entire page into anti-cop technique, how to de-arrest, like understanding how they set up their lines and do a kettle and corral, how to avoid like everything.
So basically, what I'm getting is that you were able to use your platform to help with the protests that were happening.
Yeah.
And it deterred the people that you don't want to interact with you to interact with you.
And I still do that. I still share content regarding trans rights and queer rights, as well as people of color. Those things are very important to me. Also, like all this abortion stuff in Texas makes me so mad. It makes me so mad.
So you're kind of also just practicing the law of attraction by sharing like your viewpoints and using your platform to like spread the better good, but also like deterring the people and drawing the people that agree with you. So I think that's quite beautiful in so many ways.
I honestly enjoy it. I enjoy being authentic about who I am. The majority of the people who support my work are queer or trans. A lot of trans people follow me. And I'm not the only trans person in the industry. There are several others. A couple of them are actually a lot more talented than me. There's some really, really, I'm not going to necessarily out them because I don't know how much they put that out there. I'm very public about the fact that I'm trans. It's on my page. Like it's very apparent. I have the day that I started the hormones like on my page. But there are several other trans and queer people in the industry who are extremely talented. But yeah, I like talking about what's important to me. And I have kidney disease, and not bad. It's like stage 2, which is like, there's just don't get an MRI with contrast dye and don't do drugs. It's kind of like the rules for that. But it does mean that if I get COVID, I'm kind of screwed. Like my kidneys could easily fail. So I decided that I wasn't going to go out there and protest, but I was going to use every aspect of my platform in any way that I can to signal boost as much as possible. I try to avoid putting it on the page itself for now, unless it's something I feel really strongly about, then I'll put it there. But for the most part, I try to keep that work related, but my story is a whole roller coaster ride.
Okay, so when you're overwhelmed thinking about all of these things and like it hurts to think about all the injustice in the world and how it impacts everybody around us, how do you kind of like get your brain out of that downward spiral and get back into like I'm doing okay? Like, how do you get back there?
So the secret to peace, the secret, like inner peace and happiness, is gratitude and contentedness. There's this Buddhist, it's like a story or philosophy or whatever, but basically all addiction, both process addictions like self-harm and things like that, as well as like physical, like drug addictions, stem from the pursuit of pleasure, with the misunderstanding that that pleasure is happiness. But pleasure is not happiness. Pleasure is temporary, and happiness is a consistent feeling. So happiness comes from being grateful and content with where you are and what you have, and pleasure comes from something outside of yourself. So the secret to finding peace and being happy wherever you are is coming from your ability to accept and be grateful for where you are in the moment. And the important thing about that is that's always 1,000% in your own control. That comes from inside of you, whereas pleasure comes from outside of you. It is not within your control. You need outside forces to seek pleasure, but to seek happiness, you can do that all internally, no matter where you are.
I feel like I needed to hear that today.
Thank you for relaying all of your therapy sessions in that nice, well concise bundle.
Oh, I if you need coping skills, I can give you some great coping skills. I have another really good one. When I have things that I'm gonna have to deal with and I have to worry about. So like, for example, my landlord is selling this property and I'm in like a guest house. So it's likely that whoever buys the property, I'll be able to continue to rent, but I don't know that, right? So I could be really worried about that, you know, and I have some legal things that need to get sorted. I could be really worried about that. But if I spent all my time worrying about those things that I have no control over right now in this moment, I would never get anything done and I'd be absolutely miserable. So I use a technique I call the book on the shelf. And basically, I'm a very mentally visual person. So this won't work if you don't operate that way. But if you can picture things vividly in your mind, I find this very helpful. So basically, I have a bookshelf in my mind and I picture it in my peripheral. So if I'm looking straight ahead, I can still see it and I know that it's there, but I'm not looking directly at it. It's off in my side view. And every time I have something like that I'm worried about, that I'm going to have to deal with, but in the moment right now, I can't do anything about it, I take a book and I title that book whatever that issue is. And then I, in my mind, very gently close it and put it on that shelf. And while I do that, I say this mantra in my head of, I hear you. I see what you're saying. You're absolutely right. We're going to have to deal with this, but not right now. Right now, we have to focus on other things. So I hear you, and I'm going to set this over there, and we're going to come back to it. And so each time I have to talk to my lawyer or talk to my landlord or I'm dealing with those issues in the moment, I take the book off the shelf and I add a new chapter. And when I'm done, I close it and put it back.
That was so good. And it helps you live in the present versus trying to like foresee the future. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Because I mean, I have no
Pauses.
control over that right now, but I need to protect my peace.
Yeah. I can see that totally helping with like just that constant cycle of like overthinking the same thing where you don't have any more information, but you can't stop thinking about it. It's just like, let's just shelve it. It's okay. We'll come back to it later. That's so good.
Yeah. And then if I'm ever so emotionally charged that I don't have the mental clarity to do that type of visualization, I have other techniques that I use to ground myself. One that's really common that I use. I mean, I don't really honestly struggle that much with my anxiety anymore, but I'm sure I will. Again, it comes and goes, things are fluid. Mental health is a fun, ever-changing world, but I call it 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And a lot of people know this one, but I don't know if you've heard of it. So I call it 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And what you do is you sit straight up and down and you sit with your back straight and your feet square on the ground. And you put, you rest your hands on your thighs. So you sit, very upright. And then you count 5 things that you can see, 4 things that you can touch, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things that you can smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. And usually after often after just doing that once, I feel a lot better. But sometimes I just need to do it again. And it's okay to repeat the same ones or come up with new ones or do them in a different order or whatever it is. But the point is that you're no longer thinking about whatever's upsetting you, and you're focusing on what's going on around you in this exact moment and grounding yourself to your senses.
I use that too. I find it very helpful.
And so if you do you have like parting words of wisdom for the podcast? Like what would you leave everybody with? I mean, you already said so much, so clearly we could end it at like your last good list of coping mechanisms, but do you have like a conclusion that you would want to share?
One of my most important daily practices is the concept of self-compassion. You should treat yourself as if you are an honored guest in your home. And that is like the basis for how I maintain everything that I do.
So good.
Thank you so much.
I'm so grateful we had this conversation. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Connected in Glass. Make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram for more information on the artists we interview and for updates on the podcast.